on the attendees list, so really good to have you join, and hopefully you'll get something valuable from today's session. Today we're covering off practical steps to reduce risk, support well-being, and strengthen documentation in the workplace. Some of you who will be on the call will already know myself. I will take you through my introduction now in a second. In terms of session purpose, so a little bit like what we had explained in some of the invites for the webinar, you want to have a consistent approach to managing your absence and attendance. So we'll give you a simple framework to handle sickness absence, run effective return to work meetings, and also talk a little bit about occupational health in the workplace, and then give you some confidence in dealing with these situations yourselves. There's also some information that we're going to send to you after the webinar. You will get the slides and you will get the downloadable pack that we've put together, which you can use live in the workplace at any stage when something comes up relating to absence that you're unsure of. The focus in this session is on scenarios, short-term patterns, long-term absence, what qualifies as long-term absence, mental health and potential disability. So you leave with, as we said, wording templates, clear decision points that support well-being while reducing risk. So our agenda for today, we have an hour together. We're going to cover off what the 2026 landscape looks like, what robust looks like in terms of your paperwork and your business, managing short and long-term absence, disabilities in general, mental health, reasonable adjustments, what's coming as part of the employment bill, medical evidence and occupational health, what you can ask for, what we advise in some of those situations or conversations, capability, conduct, and ill health dismissal. So how do you get to a point where you could potentially have a colleague leaving your business that you've managed through capability processes? Record keeping, and obviously the capability of your managers, who sometimes have to have these discussions without a whole lot of training, case scenarios, and then Q&A. So introductions to myself. Some of you, as I said, will work with us already. Some of you will know myself very, very well. I am the Managing Director of Signature Associates and have worked in human resources for too long to remember at this stage. We have decided to put on our monthly webinars for current clients that we have, but also potential new clients, people who want to drop in, other HR consultants, other HR experts, because for us it was about sharing some of the updates that were kind of regularly being communicated in social media or in the news, but also trying to give businesses an insight into HR in general, educating them, making them understand how the department for their people or their finance function needs to look like. And today Michaela is joining me. She's our marketing manager and she helps to keep me on track with the technical side of things, and she supports running some of the polls that we're going to run. So Michaela, thank you so much for your assistance today. So about us in Signature Associates, as I said, we cover off the people and culture element with human resources. We also cover off financial services. So we have fractional HR directors and finance directors, and we operate fractional HR and finance functions. We also work with a lot of businesses on an ad hoc basis in terms of projects and transformation. That could be anything from scaling up, scaling down, restructuring, cultural projects, you name it. There's a huge list that I could talk about. Learning and development then, we work on bespoke management development programs, leadership coaching, executive coaching, also more off-the-shelf programs for businesses who may come to us and say, Maria, I need something that's just going to address this one area of concern. My managers are of a certain level, and how can I give them the skills to equip them to make them more confident in their day-to-day management of people, but also to grow them within their career. So it's really important. So always at the start of these sessions, because we want to try and make them as interactive as possible, what we will do is we'll run a poll. And the polls then enable us to gather information from yourselves, the audience, and the polls will cover off a number of areas linked to the topic, but also will ask you about how things are running in your business and what you're experiencing. Off the back of the answers that we get for the polls, we then would usually design some of our content that we would share, or some of our content for our website or our downloadables, which would address some of the situations maybe, or trends or stats that the polls are showing, to then ensure that our learning is linked to what you may need help with. So I'm going to hand over the screen sharing to Michaela, who's going to set up the polls for us. And then what you will have on your screens are the options to vote on 10 different questions. So Michaela, over to you. Okay. So the first question, as I said, a lot of this is to support us, making sure we have the appropriate learning for people on the call, but also people on the call to come back to us after the webinar. So which best describes your organization's absence levels over the last 12 months? Okay, so people are voting. Interesting. Okay. So 60% of you have said that they've stayed about the same. 30% are saying it's increased over the last 12 months. And we're going to cover off exactly what we're seeing in 2026 at the moment and why those increases or what you're feeling in your business will be relevant. Okay, Michaela, do you want to go to the next one? So what's your biggest absence challenge right now? Okay, short-term intermittent absence, long-term sickness, mental health and burnout, capability process, or something else? Okay. So a high percentage of you are talking about the short-term intermittent absence. Capability is not coming into it at all, and some have raised long-term sickness. Okay, Michaela, next one. So do you use absence triggers, which is what we're going to also talk about today, in terms of what mechanism can you put into your organization to enable you to track and understand when you feel absence triggers have been hit, and what do you then do about it, and how do you make sure that you have consistency within your organization as to how and when you deal with levels of absence. Okay, so Bradford factor, yes, okay, but we use it, but we're inconsistent. 33%, 43% don't use it, 29% not sure. Okay. So absence trackers, for example, would be, and as I said, I'm going to go into a bigger explanation of it later, the amount of days somebody may have missed over the amount of occurrences that you may have had. So if you've had 10 days over 3 occurrences, the Bradford factor scoring is worked out on the basis of the volume of absence and occurrences. So it's a really useful, simple tool to enable you to manage your absence better. Okay, Michaela, next one. How confident are managers in having return to work and welfare conversations? This is one that we see a lot in terms of they don't know what they are allowed to ask about, especially when it comes to health. You're not a qualified GP. What can I ask about? Can I really ask about that? Can I delve into their health situation? Okay, so some of you have said somewhat. Okay. 40% of you are not very confident. Okay. And 18% not at all. Okay, again, that's really, really useful. Okay, Michaela, next one. What is the most common pattern you see? Okay, so Mondays, so it gives you obviously earlier in the week, later in the week. Repeated minor illnesses. So you may have somebody who's taking regular days off with migraines, for example. But that continues and continues over a period of time. So then, okay, stress related. The patterns in relation to days of the week would be that if, for example, you're sitting down with somebody and you're reviewing their absence, you may notice that it seems to be that it's usually a Monday they're taking off, or it's usually a Friday. And can you actually talk about that in a situation where you're sitting down to review staff? Absolutely. It's it's a major thing that you need to look at, because again, it might identify something that's going on in their personal life, or are they down in the pub on a Sunday watching the football, and then they're just not able to come into work on a Monday morning. So again, you really see mixed kind of situations and scenarios happening. Okay, Michaela, next one. How quickly do you complete return to work meetings after an absence? So this is very, very important in the proactive management of your absence in your business. But the other part of this is around the protecting of the business, which enables the person to come back to work. You have the sense check to make sure that they're fine to come back. You get whatever documentation you need to get, and then there's no risk of them being back in the workplace after they've had that confirmation with you within discussions that they are happy and feel well enough to return, is is the key. So where you usually see a business that won't hold regular return to work meetings, you would normally see a higher level of absence. And then when you implement the return to work process, what would then happen is you'd see a difference very, very quickly around that accountability conversation of meeting the person coming back to work. So that's really, really interesting. So small number of use of the same day, right? Depends, I suppose, if they've been out for a period of time during that day. A high number of use said within 48 hours, absolutely. So as soon as you can get to that person coming back into the workplace, from a safety point of view, you really need to be getting them as soon as possible. Because say, for example, you've got a situation where somebody has hurt their back in the workplace or outside of work, for example, or they have a sporting injury linked to a personal hobby. And they're coming back into work, and say they're in a manual type of job, maybe in a warehouse. As soon as you do that return to work meeting, at least the what's the word I'm looking for? The responsibility or any further injury that may happen to that person will have reduced, because you will have logged some of that in your return to work form. Now, a large number of people on this are saying to them that you do them, but you don't do them consistently, which is then a concern, because if you're managing absence and you sit down within a absence review meeting, and an employee might say to you, okay, I don't remember being absent on those dates. Can you give me the return to work meetings that you've done? So sometimes you will get a question like this. And then, for example, if you haven't got all of your return to work meetings filed away, and you're not even doing them, then you are in a situation where you can't really answer that colleague back. They could potentially say, if you've not got a HR system, well, I don't remember being sick. I don't think I was sick on those days. Now, you might have your text messages, your calls that they would have reported their absence with, and so on, to follow up on that. But again, how can you ensure that, and we'll cover off documentation later in the presentation, how can we ensure that they're being done correctly if, for example, we don't have the documentation for the return to work meeting? Also, if you're not doing them consistently, the danger is that one staff member may raise that with you to say, well, you're not doing them consistently, so how come you're treating me differently to the other colleague who may have been absent, who hasn't had a return to work meeting? So again, very, very important. So Michaela, next one, please. Okay, this is a really interesting one. So how often do you refer to occupational health or seek medical advice for long-term absence? So this is really, really important, because sometimes businesses don't know that they have the ability to do this. Now, again, it's linked to your employment contract. So within your employment contracts, you may have under your absence clause or in your absence policy that at any stage the business can write to their doctor and seek medical reports or assistance, or they can refer the colleague to an occupational health provider who would then carry out a proper medical check. The challenge is for us, obviously, as business owners and as HR professionals, is we're not a GP. So we can't really get into any discussion as such about what a person needs or doesn't need. So when you have a employee, for example, who may be long-term sick, and long-term sick I would class as over 4 weeks, usually what we would do then is, and depending on what they're out sick with, if it was, for example, work-related stress, you might say to yourself, okay, I'm going to get occupational health because they're raising its work-related stress. I need to get that checked in terms of what they're saying that's linked to. Is it, they're overworked, they are doing too many hours, there's too much pressure on them in the role, they're not getting the right management support, and so on. So the occupational health report is really your clarification from a medical professional of what that person needs. So it's very, very important. Again, obviously there's a cost to occupational health, so it is something that you need to monitor very carefully. It's also something that you could do at a later stage in terms of, again, depending on case by case scenario, you may have a welfare meeting scheduled with your employee that you can sit and you can discuss any sort of return to work or support needed. But you might not always rush straight to an occupational health report unless it was something more serious. So again, it's around knowing when to use the right tool to get what you need, which is all of this should be linked to trying to get the person back into work. Okay, Michaela? Which area creates the most legal or HR risk for you? Okay. So if you have workers in the workplace with disabilities, if you have workers that need reasonable adjustments, and we're going to talk about those in more details, what does a reasonable adjustment mean? Inconsistent treatment, we've referred to it a little bit already in the webinar around how you apply your policies and how you apply your rules within your business. Documentation gaps, okay. And dismissal decisions, okay. So again, it's about understanding what you can do within your disciplinary process when it's linked to absence management. Again, it's a tricky one. It's not sometimes as straightforward as conduct, where you may have somebody who has stolen something from a site and it's there on CCTV. The investigations have been done. It's very, very simple. And they have, say, gross misconduct effectively is what it is. And you'll be able to go straight to dismissal with somebody like that. With the absence management and health conditions that you may be dealing with, or even disabilities, that's where you need a more considered approach. So, 56% of you have said that that's the area, dismissal decisions are the area that creates the most legal risk for you. Okay. Michaela, next one. How well do your current policies reflect how absence is handled in practice? And we're going to talk around what a policy should entail on this session. So if you've got policies at the moment, if you haven't got policies, that's also fine. But realistically, you would be wanting to come off the call today with a plan to get your policies up to date, because realistically, you should have all of this structure in your business, ideally to protect yourselves. Okay, so 86% of you is mostly aligned in terms of policies. Sometimes there's a number of you that have said it's often different. Again, it's back to that consistency of how you apply them. Okay, Michaela, next one. So what would make the biggest difference in the next 30 days to you and what you're experiencing in your business? So processes and templates, very important. Managers training, scripts, better reporting. Again, some of you may have HR systems, some of you may not. Some of you may experience already headaches with occupational health support. So have you got somebody who fits with your business in terms of an occupational health provider? You can deal with the very, very big ones sometimes. You can deal with somebody more local to you. Again, you can write to the GP. You can seek the medical information if it's outlined within your policy and your contract. Again, there are different routes here. We use some very good systems that we can track everything from the minute that request is sent over to get consent from the employee to when it comes back, and then going through that report for the return to work meeting. So a lot of it is it's very easy now and very efficient. So manager training and scripts is the one that's coming up the highest. Okay, so Michaela, we need to think about that for our packs for people on the webinar. Okay, next one, Michaela.
That was the last one.
Okay, super. Yeah. That gives us a good flavor of what we're dealing with just for this call or this webinar. Okay. The next thing to take you through is realistically what is going on in the world of absence and attendance in the UK. You've got the employment bill that's coming, and a lot of a raft of employment law changes over the next 2 years. So that's going to be, it's going to be challenging to keep on top of. But realistically, if you have signed up to the newsletters, you're attending webinars, and you're learning as you go, it's not something I would panic about, but it's still something that just, be aware of it. Pick up the phone. Liaise with other business contacts that you have sometimes who may be going through the same thing. Use the network that you have around you. And a lot of these discussions that will be happening, whether it be on webinars or social media or the news, etc., they're giving a lot of information, so it can be quite overwhelming for business owners to have to think about this stuff. But that's where some of these webinars are really, really useful. So again, it's just booking a call with us, having an understanding of what you need to be thinking about. We'll always do that complimentary to support customers, and then they understand how we work with people, and then it's around giving them a framework and some sort of a not package, but some sort of a setup that works for them, so that they may not need everything. It's a bit like what the stats showed on the recent poll there, that a lot of it is around management training and scripts. And once you give them the tools, and something as simple as a script can make sure that they know exactly what they're going to cover. And it relaxes them in the meeting, because they can practice those scripts, or they can role play them with colleagues or yourselves. So in terms of absence and attendance in the UK, so latest published view covering for 2025 from the Office of National Statistics is, well, that's our latest full year that we can talk about, is 2024, 2% sickness absence rate, and 148.9 million working days lost across the UK. So when you think about it, it's 4.4 days per worker. From the HSE, then, they always publish their stats, 40.1 million working days lost. And again, this is just to give you a kind of an idea of the gravity of it when you think about the 22 million that are linked to stress, depression, and anxiety. And how can you then create well-being and support within your organization to ensure that you're not a business who have people out with lost working days or injuries? The employment tribunal volumes is a very, very interesting one, because with the new employment bill, you're going to have a huge increase in employment tribunals for an area that is already still lagging due to COVID. So you are seeing employment tribunals not being scheduled for 12 or 24 months, depending on the case. You can see from July to September 2025, you've had an increase from 11,700 right up to 14,000, and that's increasing further. And I think AI is also supporting, not supporting, but AI is also having an impact on that, in terms of, colleagues will go to ChatGPT, they'll write from their mind as to where they feel aggrieved or what's happened in a scenario or an employment scenario, and then ChatGPT will enable them to submit something like that, because obviously it's very professional, it covers the legal aspect of it. So you are definitely seeing those volumes increase already. With ACAS, then obviously, who are the kind of intermediary board or association between employers and employees, they talk about disability discrimination. And cases referred to ACAS. So what will usually happen, if you're not familiar with ACAS, is once you've had an employee that has a dispute, but they leave your business, they would then, the next step for them would be to go to ACAS. ACAS may contact you directly and have a conversation with you to say, we've got an employee who's had a dispute, can we talk to you about it? And we would have these calls every week, and we would talk to them about what's happened within a specific case. There may be a discussion about whether you would want to enter a settlement agreement or not to avoid going to tribunal, and a lot of employers will say no at that stage, because if they've dealt with the case correctly, they have nothing to worry about. The next step for an employee would be to go to the employment tribunal and file an ET1 form, and then it's a waiting game, and it's getting your packs ready, it's dealing with your lawyers and so on. So again, as you can see, everything is on the increase. Why does it feel harder in 2026? I think 2026 is going to be harder anyway when we talk about the increased employment law changes that are coming. But in terms of absence, more specifically, you're talking about more complex health issues. So they're seeing more stress, more anxiety. You are experiencing, I suppose, Gen Z coming into the workplace as well, more so where they would have been at university throughout COVID. Potentially they wouldn't have been working face to face, so that adjustment for them into the working place, back into office environment, can be quite tough. While there's operational resilience under strain, you're seeing businesses that are potentially working with less staff, less headcount, because of increased national insurance, increased wages, national living wage. All of those are having an impact on budgets that employers would have. So then their team are working harder. In terms of, sorry, my formatting on my slide there has repeated itself. In terms of burnout and stress hotspots, you have this kind of always on culture, and let me explain that to you. So as part of the discussions about the employment bill that was coming, they discussed about the right to policy, which was a right to switch off policy. Now they do have it in Ireland, they do have it in some other countries that we deal with, and what that refers to is when you go home from work, that the right to switch off is there, and that's a policy itself that cannot be broken or breached. They didn't implement it for the UK, funny enough. It may be something that they look at later, but that always on culture is where the expectation of, say, somebody at home with a laptop or a mobile phone, and they're always responding to those emails or messages, etc., or chats. And is their day becoming longer because some of those are working from home if they're starting earlier to get through a bigger workload? Again, blurred boundaries potentially could be between work that people are doing within departments. It could be between their managers, etc. And then managers needing better tools. So if companies are not investing because of increased costs in the UK, or for example, their businesses are struggling, they're not going to invest in tools to enable people to do their job. They're not going to invest in training. So one of the first things you would have seen with COVID would have been training budgets wiped out, because that wasn't the main priority for people at that time. It was just surviving and keeping their business open. We've got this growing claims exposure. We spoke a little bit about the element of AI. Also, the biggest one I think that's coming is this unfair dismissal risk. So your unfair dismissal timeline before the new employment bill was 2 years, so somebody could not take you to tribunal unless they had 2 years service. That is now changing to 6 months. So what that's going to mean for businesses is the recruitment will need to be better done, more thorough. You're going to need to train your managers in recruiting people correctly. You're going to need to really monitor people within your probation period. So a lot of companies already are putting in shorter probation periods so that they're moving them from 6 to 3 months. And then what that gives them, it gives them a 3-month buffer to extend probation. But as you know yourself, it's very difficult sometimes when you've got somebody in training in a new job. And then what happens is there's the training piece, but then there's you want to see them in that role doing the job before you can really assess them. So it's definitely worth having a think about some of that after the webinar today, because that would be one of the first couple of things that I would do around your probation, recruitment training, changing your policies, your contracts, and so on. So especially as well, inconsistent process. I've talked about it earlier on the call. You need to have your hand in your heart and be able to say that how I have dealt with John is how I have dealt with Peter and is how I have dealt with Mary. Because again, employees will pick holes in that, but also tribunals will pick holes in that in terms of a lot of the say previous cases, or if employees raise that you haven't been dealing with me consistently, tribunals will look back into other cases or other instances in the company of how you've dealt with certain things. So it's really important. Okay, so the Equality Act risk points. So really important. There's some key areas that are coming out in terms of new employment bill, but also that have always been there within your Equality Act. So your disability related absence, how are you supporting that? Pregnancy and maternity, this is changing as well as part of your new employment bill. Protection for women coming back from maternity leave is absolutely key. Mental health, absolutely key. It's always been on the radar. It's still on the radar. It's going to be even more important when you think about staff well-being. Indirect discrimination via rigid trigger points. So something that we could probably spend another separate session on talking about indirect discrimination. But also then reasonable adjustments. Are we being reasonable with how we want people to come into work and how we want them to be supported? Is there specific hours they need? Is there specific equipment they need? Is there phased returns that they need that we should be accommodating? Have we got disabled people in our organisation who need ramp access? Have we got, the list is endless. Reasonable adjustments can come at you from any angle. Mainly, you'll see them coming following your occupational health reports. So this, again, just being aware of what your duty of care is around reasonable adjustments. Fair process basics. So again, with all of this information, we had a webinar last month on talking about difficult conversations in the workplace. The clearer you are around expectations, the easier it gets to manage, because there's no grey area. It's very black and white. You've got meetings documented. You may have informal discussions to start any of these processes off, because you don't want to march an employee straight into a formal conversation. Again, it's about that relationship that you have with them, that they can trust, that you'll sit with them and you'll treat their concerns or their requests with importance. Meaningful review meetings. So it may not feel overly important to you what they're bringing to the table sometimes, but it's putting yourself in the staff member's shoes and understanding that you need to really treat any scenario that they're coming to you with due care. Opportunities to improve. Yes, we can definitely always get better with everything we do, whether it's policies or processes. Right to be accompanied. So in terms of right to be accompanied, so you will have in your dismissal process, or your dismissal policy or disciplinary policy. Some of you will be well experienced in this already. Say, for example, where you're holding formal grievance hearings or disciplinary hearings. Within the invite letter, they will be getting the right to be accompanied by a trade union rep or another employee in your organisation. Again, depending on whether your business recognises trade unions, that should be very clear in your policies already, because again, it's that witness for them within that meeting. ACAS guidelines, again, they have a fantastic website. They have lots of free material that you can access and use. You can refer your staff to ACAS for guidelines if they wish. They're there to support both staff and employer. Again, what they recommend as part of this process, whether for people returning to work, is i.e. keeping in touch with people while they're out. Obviously, they're signed off with a cert, but you will have clear guidelines as to when you will be in touch with them and what that would look like. Return to work meetings, we spoke about them earlier. We spoke about the trigger points, and we spoke about recording decisions and rationale. Again, everything comes back to how you document conversations with your people or how you follow up in an email. And again, it needn't be tons and tons of data in an email. It just needs to be, we met today, this is what we discussed, this is what you talked about needing, this is what I'm now going to do off the back of this, let's regroup on the 15th of the month. It's very clear, it shows that you're treating their situation with importance. So what does robust look like for your HR department or your people management in general? So as we said, clear policies are really, really important. Reporting rules, who do they have to speak to when they're sick? What is the situation with fit notes? What does sick pay look like? Do you only pay statutory sick pay? Do you pay company sick pay? When are we going to contact you? Do we accept a WhatsApp or do we expect people to call in sick? What are the trigger points? Have we flexibility around absence? What is our confidentiality in relation to dealing with people's private personal health conditions? You know, you might go and do a return to work interview, or you might see a manager who goes to do a return to work interview. And next thing is you walk to the office and the return to work interview is left on a desk where people can see. Again, big no. So really it's around data handling, medical information, filing it away, make sure it's password protected, getting it on your HR system, and just understanding the importance. It's like as if you were in a GP surgery and you were standing at the receptionist desk, and you then could see patient information. That would be a big problem. Simple data and cadence, so patterns and trends. So I've got an apprentice who seems to miss every Friday. He has rang in sick with headaches for the last 6 weeks on a Friday. So what happens there? So sitting down with the apprentice to say, how come it's always a Friday? Is there anything that's happening? Oh, he might say to you, okay, I can't come in on a Friday because we don't have a bus from my local town to the workplace on a Friday. It could be something as silly as that, because until you ask the question, you don't know. So what are the trends? What are the department hotspots? So this is a good one. So when you run your absence reporting for your business, realistically, you may have hotspots. Usually it will be where a department is under pressure. There may be high levels of absence already, thus then creating more work for others. There may be disengagement. There may be poor communication. It may be that the department structure needs looking at, but that is one thing. You'll know yourself. It could be linked also to a manager sometimes. So say, for example, you've got 10 managers. Managers are quite strong, and 8 of those have very good attendance rates in their teams. But you have 2 that have consistently high labor turnover or high absence. That would be a department hotspot for me. So the questions that I would be asking that manager would be, okay, can you tell me why the absence is always so high? Can you tell me why your labor turnover is always so high? And then, going down into the detail of that, making them understand, do they need training? Are they putting people under too much pressure? Are they a good people manager in general? So very, very important to kind of have those open and honest discussions. Consistent review. So are you reviewing your absence regularly, or is it just, I'll review it today because I feel like it, or my absence is shot up, so I'm just reviewing it because the trends are telling me that the absence is quite high across the organization. Again, if you have a HR consultant you're working with or a HR manager in your team, you'd say, can I have, as part of my managing director meeting agenda, every quarter, give me an absence report for the organization. That's one way of making sure that you're getting what you need and that you've got visibility top line of what those numbers look like. Because you also may have a huge cost link to that, and your finance director or your finance manager in your business may tell you you've had 700 hours this month of absence and company sick pay to match that. So while the business has been down those 700 hours, you've still been paying for them. So where has the work that needed to be done gone to? Manager capability, then conversations, skills, not being afraid to talk about absence, showing them the stats, return to work meetings, maybe role playing return to work meeting training with them, then ensuring they know when to escalate something. So they may pick up on something within a return to work meeting and they're unsure how to deal with it. Again, if they can come to you and they can sense check that, fantastic, that's what you want. Tribunal ready notes, again, you want documentation for everything. So often what might happen with an absence case is you start with absence being noticed, and there's the return to work meetings for all of those that will be in place. Then you have an absence review scheduled. You'll then sit with the person. You may give them a period of improvement. If they don't improve, then you're back to the disciplinary type approach. Again, you review again. There may be a period of improvement. Again, back to disciplinary approach, and you move them through the warnings to dismissal. But again, you need to have that whole chronological order of events in your paperwork and your documentation. And it's very, very important that it's facts and not opinions. So a lot to think about there. Excuse me. So what your policy should make crystal clear then, we covered a little bit of this in the last slide. You may be in a situation where you're not even disciplining somebody for absence levels, but you're disciplining them for breach of sickness procedures. So for example, they don't call in sick and they're AWOL, which is absent without leave. So Jessica doesn't call in sick tomorrow morning. The MD comes into the HR department or picks up the phone to us and they say, well, she's not reported for sick. I'm actually quite worried. You should make an effort to contact them. Of course you should, in case something has happened. They've had an accident on the way to work or whatever. It may be out of character for somebody not to call in sick. But for example, what you then would do is, if, for example, you still don't hear from them, the next day or two, you may send them an AWOL letter. And what that would do is it would ask them to contact you because obviously you've had this unexpected sickness. So again, if they turn back into work 2 days later and they say, oh, I just forgot, I didn't have the number for the office, or I didn't have your mobile number to call in sick. Okay, that's not really that good enough. It's not really good enough, is it? It's then a conversation around, okay, investigate as to why they haven't followed the sickness reporting procedure. And then it could be potentially a disciplinary invite to a hearing to then discipline them on that, because you may see people who will regularly just not report in sick. The self-certification is something they complete themselves on the DirectGov website, or you may have a self-certification form on your internet. They can self-certify themselves for up to 7 days, and then you would need the medical note from the doctor. Keeping in touch on what the expectations are. Again, we went through SSP and company sick pay, return to work meetings, trigger points, long-term absence pathways, and then occupational health referral. So your policy really should outline what happens if somebody goes long-term absence over 4 weeks, is when I would call them then long-term absent. And then obviously, as you say, the right to be accompanied. You may have a situation where somebody might say to you, do you know what, my husband is going to join me on this call because, you know, I'm dealing with a very difficult medical issue and he's been there with the doctors with me and so on. And then it's up to you to decide whether you think that's reasonable or not. Again, depending on the situation, it's not a bad thing to allow a family member to attend as long as they're not going to be disruptive. Again, it's back to what your policy will state, which is another employee or a trade union rep. But again, in your mind, it's about what would be deemed as reasonable, because some of this can actually work in your favor if you are, you know, allowing somebody to support the colleague. We spoke a little bit about the Bradford factor, which is the most common one. So what you might do within your policy is you set out your triggers. Again, something simple like this would be 3 occasions in 6 months. If you trigger 3 occasions in 6 months, you then have an formal absence review. If you trigger 10 working days in 12 months, which is almost a day a month, again, you can set those triggers however you want, but it's good to use best practice and common practice. You know, looking at other policies, looking what other businesses are using is very important as well. And then having your review point, as I said. Building in flexibility to that. So where you wouldn't really typically apply the trigger process is where you may have somebody off and they're off long-term sick, or they may have a terminal illness like cancer. So they could be off for a long period of time. Again, that isn't really something you would apply the Bradford factor for, because if you look at what they're off with, it's a situation that's completely out of your control. Now, you will definitely be able to calculate the Bradford factor score for them, but again, it's a little bit of a different scenario. If it's pregnancy, if it's linked to disability, if it's linked to something like a terminal illness, again, the conversation can be slightly different. Okay, how do we want to work together through what you're going through, and how do I best support, but how do I ensure that your work gets done in their department? So adjusting the lens is very important, and definitely considering occupational input alongside your Bradford factor is very, very important. So good triggers create consistency. Great triggers also protect against discrimination by allowing justified exemptions. So a lot of these tools are to keep you safe. So that's the most important thing. Short-term frequent absence, where you will see kind of more sporadic absence when you're looking at the Bradford factor is, say you may have a worker and they're missing days every week. It won't be too long before you're sitting down with them, because obviously the amount of days over the occasions with the Bradford factor calculation will drive up their score. So then short-term absence will usually drive that up a lot quicker because your number of days and your occasions are higher volume. So realistically, you'll get them into the office, you'll have the return to work meeting, you'll have the attendance chat. Is there anything else going on? Do you need any support? Am I missing something here? Stage 1 review meeting, stage 2 final review, and then the outcome. So again, you work through a process. It's a bit like a performance management process. But the key rule is do not walk past anything, do not have the conversation. You would rather sit down and have the conversation and understand what's going on than leaving it too late and documenting it consistently. So long-term absence, keep it human, keep it structured, because again, sometimes you don't know what the person could be dealing with at home. Agree a contact plan. If people are signed off, I wouldn't be bombarding them with calls every week. If they have a medical cert for 4 weeks, for example, I would just let them know, I am here if you wish to contact me. Would you like to have a check-in while you're out for the next 4 weeks? I am happy to do whatever type of check-in you want, because some people have no support at home. So again, some clients are really good with that. I wouldn't always encourage, having lots of contact when they're signed off, only from a support mechanism. Again, but they would agree to that. Confirming certification requirements, it's useful to do that early, unless, say, when they go out sick and they haven't got access to their policies or procedures. You want to make sure that you're getting those medical certs, because realistically, you don't have to process sick pay if you don't have them. And a lot of clients won't process sick pay unless you have them. Again, depending on what the condition may be, the occupational health referral being done early can be very, very useful in certain stages. Because what you want to do is be armed with the correct information to have the right conversation with the person. So temporary adjustments, phased return to works can be very common when you've got people coming back from longer term absence, or maybe linked to stress in work or workplace anxiety or any of that sort of stuff. Hold review meetings, obviously, as we said. Document decisions, consider dismissal as a last resort. Dismissal is definitely the last resort when it comes to absence, but again, when it's linked to longer term, more serious absence, you need to make sure that you have your ducks in a row and you have everything organized. So if anybody has any sort of cases that they're really struggling with at the moment, please reach out. We're more than happy to have a coffee with you or have a call and chat through it. Again, you don't know what you don't know, but having the right guidance with this stuff is will save you later on. Again, what good looks like, we've talked about a lot of those. And stress. Okay, so you will have a lot of certificates that we will receive on a weekly basis, because we manage kind of fractional HR functions. And so we've clients that would deal with us and we'd manage their inboxes and their HR systems. So when the certs would come in, they would come in through the people emails for the client's email account. And work-related stress is on the up. So again, it's something that's very not difficult to manage, but it needs open conversations, because if they're saying to you, I'm stressed in work, you need to understand what they're actually saying. So is it because of a new manager? Is it because they're not capable to do the job? But you definitely want to be asking, what is this that's on your cert? Because I need to understand how we can tweak or change what we're doing to make sure that it's safe for you to come back to work. And it may not be anything to do with how you're running your departments at all or how you're treating people. It may just be that the person could potentially be using that against you as a business. So again, it's just around asking the right questions and gathering the right information. Reasonable adjustments and practical examples. Again, you still have a business to run. So what's really, really important here is about having documented meetings and putting a deadline on some of this information. Because if you've got somebody who comes back to work and they say to you, I need a reasonable adjustment for 6 months, and you're sitting there as a business owner and you're going, there's no way I can accommodate this for 6 months. Again, it needs to be reasonable and realistic. So sit down, look at what you can do, look at what you cannot do. Be honest with the person. Get some HR advice if you need it. But think about then who picks up the work. Do we adjust the targets because that person's in a phased return? Does their bonus get adjusted? Does their pay get adjusted? Because obviously when people come back on a phased return to work, they may expect a full-time salary, but their hours are reduced. So again, what does that mean? So not being afraid to ask the person, because again, you will need to have realistic plans to cover the work. It could be reduced travel. It could be more predictable scheduling. It could be time for treatment if they're getting treatment for a health condition. It could be employee assistance program over on the right-hand side under support. So that's an employee assistance program that you would give to all of your staff. And they would use an online service like that for counselling. They support staff through debt, grieving, medical conditions, addiction, gambling, you name it, everything that you can think of that staff may need support with, that's what the EAP does. Do they need any further training? Do they need equipment to enable them to be in work? And then what are the escalation routes if the phased return to work is not working at the moment, or you need to tweak and change anything? So you'll always have a review period for your flexible working or your phased return to work agreements. And then you may have a deadline because there'll be a time when they'll be expected to go back to their normal working pattern. Okay, so that's very, very important. So what good looks like, and we've covered a lot of this already. I think the main thing I would probably say, the main message here is about being open. It's about them trusting that you're going to treat them with care. It's also about confidentiality. So what you don't want is you're having a discussion with them, then you're going off or you have a manager that goes down to the staff kitchen and they openly talk about the case with a number of other colleagues. So it's about trust, confidentiality. It's about support. It's about documentation. It's about being organized and getting structured. So there's your do's and don'ts. Again, the consistency across team is probably one of the most important ones as well, because how you treat one, you should treat the other. And that's where they will pick holes in your process if that's not happening. So very, very important. So case studies, to give you an example. So Alex from customer support has 5 short absences in 4 months. 2 are stress related. Their manager reports missed deadlines and reduced responsiveness. Alex says they feel overwhelmed and he's struggling to sleep. So in terms of, I'm going to open up the chat, Michaela, if that's okay, if you can do that for me.
Yeah, so if you want to open up the chats, everyone who wants to have a chat can just raise their hand and then we will unmute them.
Perfect, yeah. So what I would like to talk about as part of the chat, I suppose a part of this case scenario is what questions do you ask in the return to work meeting? What support or adjustments might be reasonable? What does good documentation look like? Don't go in having decided what the person is going to say to you. Consider if it is a disability. Avoid rigid triggers and follow your steps consistently. So does anybody want to pop anything into the chat in relation to what you may ask in the return to work meeting? So they're suffering from stress and their trigger has triggered, obviously, because they've missed a number of days over a number of occasions. So what I would do there is I would talk about, what's changed. If they've been there for a number of months, I would talk about, have they been there for a long time? Obviously, you've had increased absence over a shorter period of time more recently. Is there something that's linked to that? Obviously, your absences that you've had are stress related. Tell me about that. Is there something happening in the department that we're missing? Is there something happening at home? Is the person enjoying their role? Are they lacking on training? Has something external with the client changed? Why are they feeling overwhelmed? How can we help? That is generally the conversation that you're having. And what's very, very important is that you will take the information away. You don't need to make a decision at that stage in terms of what answers they're looking for. So if somebody comes to you and they say, right, I've got this really, really difficult health condition, I'm going to need different toilets, I'm going to need reduced hours, I'm going to need specific days from home, and you're sitting there and you're overwhelmed with this influx of information that's coming to you, you don't need to give them an answer there and then you can say, I'm more than happy to take this all away, take it away, think about it, speak to somebody who may give you some advice, and then go back and organize a formal meeting with the person. So that is kind of what I would do with that scenario. I'm going to just stop sharing my screen now. Just bear with me a second. And I will open up the floor for any questions or even any scenarios that you may be dealing with that you would like some advice with. Obviously, please don't mention any names for confidentiality reasons, but more than happy to speak to anybody who has any queries or questions or any feedback on any of the information that we've covered this morning. There's Sammy, okay. Sammy, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm just trying to turn my mic on. Sorry, I wasn't able to put anything in the chat earlier with the other scenario, but I was just, I don't know whether we weren't able to make a comment about that, going back to that.
Sammy. Michaela's going to have a look at that now at this moment in time. But go on, do you want to talk through a scenario or ask the question?
It's just if we have a scenario very similar to that,
Yes.
where somebody's reporting that they're feeling unsafe at work, or and they're not sleeping and they're upset. It's about how much we can explore that with that person without, one of the slides was about we're not here to diagnose. If
Yeah.
somebody's not sleeping, I don't feel confident to say, well, actually, why aren't you sleeping, or how much sleep are you getting? And it's
Yeah.
about keeping it from being too personal, really.
Yeah. And do you think that's just a confidence thing, Sammy, or is it just you just maybe haven't had the experience of doing it so far?
I think it is the lack of experience of doing that. And I think, because I'm not worried about having a conversation, but it's
Mm,
just about worry. Sometimes you're concerned about how far you can go with that conversation, and
yeah.
where's the line? Where do you draw that line? So in some ways, you're risk averse to having the conversation in the first place.
Of course, yeah, which is probably the worst thing to be doing because you're kind of afraid as to you don't know where to start.
Yeah, yeah,
But the
definitely.
other thing, Sammy, is I'd always say ask as many questions as you can gather answers to enable you to make an informed decision as to what you do next.
Hmm.
So where it feels, a staff member will also say to you where they don't want to get into things as to, well, I'm not comfortable talking about that. But
Yeah,
again, it's about how do you go away and make a decision based on what they're asking for, unless you have all the information. So
and it
there's a couple. Yeah, sorry, Sammy, go ahead.
And if they say they're not comfortable talking about that, you can keep it and record that, but you can't
Yeah,
do anything with that. If they're not telling you what it is that actually they're struggling with, then it's difficult to have a solution, or look for a resolution to that moving forward.
exactly. And that might be then where you may formally write to a person, or communicate by document communication to them to say, I understand you don't want to potentially talk about this or refer us, give us more information, but realistically, we need to have the detail of what you're out with, or what you're going to be out with, or what you're complaining about, whether it's absence or whatever. So the thing is it's unreasonable for them not to give you any detail. So again, that would be going down a more formal route to say, within your contract, within our sickness policy, we need to know exactly what support you need. We need to know what you're out with, and how do we support as a business, and whether we get occupational health involved. So Sammy, that is something that you would just tread carefully with. But again, it's around getting the confidence, even having some of those meetings with a HR professional or HR manager, or whoever's in your organization, etc., to learn from, because it's never an easy conversation. If there's something going on at home, sometimes they don't really want to bring it into the workplace. However, you can't deal with it if you don't know what it is. Now, Mandy.
Am I muted again? Sorry. I was just thinking that I've done lots of leadership and management courses in the past, but in
Yeah.
those courses they don't have an element about how you have those conversations about absence. So
Yes.
it's useful to thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anytime, Sammy. You know that anyway. Mandy, do you want to go next?
Here we go. Sorry, I was on mute. The question I wanted to ask Maria is, how would I deal with a long-term illness while ensuring my business responsibilities are still being met?
Mm-hmm.
So if a person is on long-term illness but it's affecting my business needs, how can I go around dealing with that?
So you may, again, it depends on the case by case scenario, Andy, as to what they're out with. So
Yeah.
so again, does it constitute as a disability, or does it qualify as a disability? How long are they going to be out for? Do you bring in a fixed term contract to cover it? Do you look at job sharing? Is there anything else you can do to support that absence? Because the problem is, the challenge is where it's impacting your business and you have tried everything you can possibly try, then it can move to capability fairly quickly. If you've someone who's out for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and you can see no end in sight, through occupational health and through doctors' reports and the right HR support, you would eventually get to a point where you would say, I cannot operate my business anymore with this situation. So again, it's just around making sure, Mandy, that you've covered every angle. At the end of the day, you have to run a business, right?
Yeah.
And if that's impacting, if you have to keep a role open for somebody that's actually physically not in the workplace, there's only so long as a small to medium business that you can do that.
So question, how long is long term?
What's the scenario, I suppose? What's the condition?
So I don't know, example, if they are saying it's stress related at work.
Yeah. So have you sat down and had a conversation with them about what the stress is related to?
Yeah. So I'm putting out a scenario here. They are saying it's a stress related due to the hours. They are not committed to do 40 hours. They want to work less hours. It's called the longer hours of stress, but however, when they first took on the job, they knew what the hours were.
Exactly. So the contract that you've given them, the role that you advertised at the time, was specific hours. And if they can't do that, realistically, then you give kind of only a couple of choices, don't you? They either do it or they leave the organisation. If that's what you need, isn't that right?
Perfect. Yeah, it is. But then it all comes down to employees saying it's unfair dismissal.
Yeah. As long as you, it's like redundancy, or it's like everything else. As long as you have a business rationale behind why. And if it's a full-time role, for example, that you need that person to do, and they've been employed to do a full-time role, unless you were happy to introduce a flexible working scenario or give them a part-time contract, the job you've hired them for is exactly what you've hired them for.
Great. Thanks, Maria.
Thanks, Mandy. I'm happy to pick up a conversation with you separately as well if you need any help with that, yeah?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just conscious we went over a little bit, and that will be because of the challenges we had at the start. So, Michaela, just for the group that's still on the call, you're going to share the slides later today.
Yes.
And you're going to share there's some useful documentation you're going to share also that people can refer to. If anybody would like to reach back out separately to Michaela or myself, absolutely drop us an email, drop us a note. I think the contact email and details are on the last slide on the pack, Michaela. So I'm going to wrap that up because I'm sure you're busy with other calls today. Thanks so much for everybody attending. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you, Michaela.
Bye. Thank you, Maria.